This is the story of the U-2 spy who fell from the sky. In 1960, a single plane crash nearly ignited World War III. Its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, became an instant celebrity, albeit a reluctant one. Flying a top-secret U-2 spy plane over the USSR, he was struck by a surface-to-air missile and forced to parachute into enemy territory. Captured alive, he was paraded in front of the world's media as the U.S. government, back in Washington, D.C., denied that he was a spy. But when the Soviets produced the wreckage of Powers' plane, it became clear that America had been caught red-handed. The fallout from this incident, known as the U-2 incident, would wreck a historic peace summit and push the Cold War into its most dangerous years. Powers' story began 2 weeks earlier, on May 1960. The United States had been conducting top-secret surveillance missions over the Soviet Union for several years. These missions were flown by the CIA's precursor, the Office of Special Projects, which flew U-2 spy planes over the Soviet Union to collect intelligence. On May, Powers, a 32-year-old Air Force pilot, took off from a secret base in England. He was to fly over Moscow and take photos of the city as well as any military installations he might pass. Powers was given a special camera for the mission. It was designed to take pictures of specific targets while keeping him on course. All he needed to do was set the coordinates. Powers completed his mission without incident and headed back to base. But things went horribly wrong on his second lap. While flying over Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, Powers' U-2 was struck by a surface-to-air missile. The explosion knocked out his radio and severely damaged his oxygen supply. Knowing that he only had minutes to live, he put on his parachute and jumped out of the plane. When he landed, he was quickly surrounded by a group of angry Soviet civilians who, according to Powers, were yelling and screaming at him and trying to grab his parachute. Soon, however, the crowd dispersed, and Powers found himself alone in a forest near the village of Nizhny Tagil. Weak from a lack of oxygen and with shrapnel digging into his leg, he made his way to a nearby river, where he washed his wounds and drank some water. Then he did something that would make him famous. He walked barefoot down a country road until he reached a house and knocked on the door. A woman answered. Powers, knowing that he could speak Russian, asked her for help, saying that he was an American pilot who had just crashed. She let him in, gave him food, and called the police. Powers was soon arrested. The Soviets wasted no time parading their captured American spy in front of the world's media. They claimed that his plane had violated Soviet airspace and that he was a spy. The U.S. government, however, said that Powers was a civilian on a research project, not a spy. They also claimed that the shoot-down had occurred over neutral international airspace. The Soviets responded by producing the wreckage of Powers' plane, which they said they had recovered from a lake near where he was captured. The U.S. government's denials fell apart. And just like that, Powers became a reluctant hero. Thousands of people showed up to see him at his court hearings in Moscow. An American journalist even interviewed him. In it, he described how he'd managed to evade capture after his plane was shot down. "I didn't know what to expect," he said. "I thought they might try to kill me. So I bailed out, landed in a field, and hid in some hay." Powers was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but after 4, he was released in a prisoner swap. But there was more to the story than met the eye. After returning to the U.S., Powers revealed how the CIA had ordered him to fly directly over the Kremlin during his mission, which is what led to his plane being shot down. This revelation caused an international incident that nearly sparked World War III. The U-2 incident derailed a historic meeting between the leaders of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, which had been scheduled to take place in Paris just days after Powers was shot down. The summit would have been the first of its kind, but it was cancelled due to the U-2 incident. And so the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union continued. The two superpowers would eventually come close to destroying the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So remember the story of the U-2 spy who fell from the sky. One flight reshaped decades. Subscribe for more.